Perhaps you'll remember that little anecdote about the two Arabs sitting blissfully smoking the hubble-bubble pipe at an oasis in the desert somewhere, when all of a sudden a camel lumbered by, and one Arab dreamily said to the other Arab, "What does that remind you of?" And the second Arab said, "Food." The first Arab, with great shock, came out of his wonderful reverie and said, "But we're Arabs, we don't eat camels." And the other one dreamily said, "I know, but everything reminds me of food." There's two simple stories. Both stories about a young man, about 23 years old now, and he'd had a very severe accident and had to have his leg amputated at the hip. He was embittered, very embittered and angry. Why me? I'm so young, I'm good looking, had my, you know how the story goes. And he'd been through 2 years of intensive therapy with a psychotherapist, but it's seemingly to no avail. He was still an angry young man. But one day he was walking down the corridor of the clinic, a hospital that he had to visit regularly, when he could hear the sound of a radio playing nearby, and also the sound of a very great sobbing and crying. So when he came to the station where he had to register, he asked, and he was told by the nurses there that this was a young woman who had just had both her breasts off with cancer, and she was in a great state of distress. Now this young man was suddenly inspired. He went back to that room, and he was wearing shorts, so it was clear that he had a prosthesis where his leg was. And there was the young woman, his own age, sobbing unconsolably. And when suddenly he unscrewed his prosthesis and started to dance around the room in front of her on his one leg. Well, all of a sudden she stopped her sobbing and began to laugh. And as she laughed, she said, "Well, if you can dance on your one leg, I can sing." And they both had a good laugh together. Now this changed his life, because very often after that, he would go into the clinics and the hospitals and do exactly the same thing, bring cheer to these people who were suffering. But then one day he was back with his psychotherapist, and the psychotherapist was going over the treatment that they'd had over these 2 years, and one of those treatments was to have the young man do a lot of drawings, and so he was going through the drawings once again, and all of a sudden the young man said, "No, stop, that one's not finished." And it was actually a drawing that the therapist had asked him to draw of his body. But what he'd drawn was a vase, and he'd taken a big black pen and made a jagged line right through the vase. And the therapist said, "Well, how is it not finished?" And the young man took a yellow pencil and drew lines coming out of the jagged black line that was drawn through the vase. And he said, "This is the light that comes through. This is how the light comes out." Then there's the simple story about a man. He was big and strong, and every day he had to get up and put across his broad shoulders a piece of wood, and on each end of the wood he had a bucket. And every day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, he would carry the pails to the river and fill them up with water and carry them back to his home. But as it happened, one of these pails had a leak, a line through it that allowed the water to seep out. So every day of his life, when the man came back to his house, he had one full pail and one half-empty pail. Now one day, the pail that had the seeping in it got up the courage to say to the man, "I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry. Every day you've carried me to the river, and every day you've filled me up, and every day when you carry me back, I'm only half full." The man said, "There's no need to apologize. Tomorrow, when we walk back from the river, look beside you." Well, as they walked along, the pail saw that along the roadside there was an abundance of beautiful flowers and greenery of all different colors, all different kinds. And when they came back to the house, the man said, "You see, knowing that you had a leak, I planted seeds along the side of the road, and every day that I've carried you, you've watered those seeds, so they've now become the abundance of flowers and blooming that brings joy to me and all others who pass this way." What do these stories remind us of? All of us perceive ourselves as having flaws, maybe a jagged line through us, maybe holes, maybe still a creeping sense of unworthiness, not good enough, a failure, not achieving anything. Where are you now? What do these stories remind us of here and now? Have we patched those leakings? Have we been able to heal them? Or are they still there? Someone sent me, and I've been sending it on, this wonderful rendition of Amazing Grace by 4 young tenors. It's an extraordinary rendition, held at the Colosseum, Rome. And in playing it, something happened for me, because through all of my life, and even in those years with Divine Mother, she used to have this wonderful woman who loved to sing amazing, but she had the most awful voice. But Divine Mother would again and again ask her to sing Amazing Grace. And all through those years, for all of my life, as long as I could remember, whenever I heard Amazing Grace, I would sob and cry. Because when it came to that line, to save a wretch like me, I would be in a paroxysm of tears. But you know what? This beautiful rendition of Amazing Grace, I didn't shed a tear. Something's happened. I wonder what it could be. Has it happened for you too? Has it happened for you? That wretch's not gone. We still look back on our life and can see the things that we wish we'd never done. We've band-aided over. But why is it we can be in this place now, where, like this Amazing Grace, we can listen to it, celebrate it, sing with it, rejoice with it, instead of being reduced to a slobbering mess on the floor? What's happened? What's happened to you? What happens? What do these simple stories evoke for you relative to this? What is it that your mind comes back to now, like the Aram under the palm tree?
It's an understanding for we always see what people, we know what people go through, we went through it ourselves. And we know that they can come.
Yes.
And without that, without our faults, we'd never been where we are now. And to celebrate our faults, thank you.
So what was it all along?
Change of perception. And the
Yes.
things that we saw as flaws are actually perfection.
Put it into words.
Acceptance. Acceptance. Gratitude.
Gratitude. Yes. We can give expression to it, can't we? And we don't even need to now recognize when we hear a rendition of it and you hear these wonderful voices booming out, to be uplifted by it, because it's there every minute, isn't it? Everything reminds us of it, doesn't it? But give it a name. Give it a name. That's the reason we're telling these stories. So you can claim whatever name you like to give it. Godhood, grace, whatever, give it a name. Recognize it. And then it's on our lips every moment, and that's what pours out of it.